Caleb Whitman found a waitress hiding in a storage room at midnight, eating leftovers meant for the trash. What he didn't know yet was that the report that would expose her wasn't coming from a security camera at all. It was coming from the one coworker who'd been quietly covering for her for months, and who was about to make a mistake neither of them could undo. 3 weeks later, Caleb would walk into a boardroom and prove that the company's own cost-cutting decision had created the exact crisis it was now trying to punish someone else for. To understand how a stack of unopened reports led to a woman eating cold fries alone in the dark, we have to go back 1 month to the day Caleb Whitman put on a dishwasher's apron for the first time in his life. Caleb Whitman was 29 years old when his father handed him a single folder and a deadline. Branch 52, Marcus Whitman said, sliding the folder across his desk. Worst performer in the company. Highest turnover. Customer complaints up. I want to know why, and I want you to find out the way I found things out when I started, from the inside, with your hands in the dishwater, not from a spreadsheet at headquarters. Caleb had grown up in boardrooms instead of baseball dugouts, had learned profit margins before algebra, and had never once, in 29 years, washed a dish for a living. His father gave him 30 days. The grease-stained apron felt wrong against his chest the first morning. Dale Hutchins, the branch manager, barely looked up when he clocked in. New guy? Those plates aren't going to wash themselves. Caleb nodded and kept his head down, same as he'd been told to. Nobody at Branch 52 knew that Caleb Cole, the name on his temporary badge, was actually the owner's son. It was 11:47 p.m. on his third night when he carried the last trash bag through the kitchen's back door. The November air bit at his wet forearms. He was turning to head back inside when he heard it, the soft creak of the storage room door, the one connecting the kitchen to the back hallway. Strange. Everyone had clocked out. He'd watched them leave. He slipped back inside, moving quietly past the dish station, drawn by a sound like paper being carefully unwrapped. He came around the edge of the industrial shelving and stopped. A young woman sat hunched on an overturned milk crate in the corner, her back against the wall. Her teal uniform, Imani embroidered on the pocket, was wrinkled from a full shift. In her hands, half a burger, still in its wax paper, the kind that gets bussed back to the kitchen when a customer leaves. Food unfinished. She ate quickly, mechanically, eyes fixed on the floor. When she finished, she folded the wrapper with care and set it in a grocery bag beside her. Then she reached for a small plastic container of cold fries and ate those too. Every one. Caleb recognized her. Imani, quiet, always took the worst tables, never complained when a customer walked out without tipping. She'd poured his coffee twice without making eye contact. He wasn't disgusted. He felt something closer to his chest caving in. This wasn't theft for the thrill of it. This was someone who needed it. Before we go any further, we'd love for you to hit that subscribe button. Your support means the world to us, and it helps us bring you even more powerful stories. Now let's begin. The next morning, Caleb arrived 30 minutes early, having barely slept. He found Dale in the cramped back office that smelled like energy drinks and deadlines. You're early, Dale said without looking up. Don't expect overtime for it. Quick question, Caleb said, leaning against the doorframe. Do we still offer staff meals? Dale snorted. Corporate cut that 6 months ago. Cost-saving measure. 20% discount now if employees want to buy food. Caleb did the math silently. 6 months ago, right around when Imani would have started needing something the company used to provide for free. Over the following days, he watched her work the floor like a ghost. Efficient, polite, invisible. When a customer snapped at her over a wrong drink order, she apologized 3 times and fixed it without complaint. When another server called in sick, she skipped her own break to cover the gap. Nobody thanked her. Nobody seemed to notice. She's weird, right? Said one of the other dishwashers, appearing beside him. At the sink. Never hangs out with anyone. Maybe she's just focused, Caleb offered. Or stuck up. Caleb bit his tongue. The person who saw the most, though, without ever once turning Imani in, was Reggie Tatum. Reggie had worked the line at Branch 52 for 6 years, closing more nights than anyone else on staff, which meant he was almost always the last person in the building besides whoever happened to still be lingering in the storage room. He had noticed Imani's late-night habit nearly 5 months earlier, had seen her slip back after her shift, had understood within about 30 seconds exactly what was happening and exactly why, because Reggie had 2 younger cousins he helped support himself and knew precisely what it looked like when somebody was doing math in their head that didn't add up no matter how many times they ran it. He never reported her. He started, instead, doing something small and deliberate. He began leaving slightly more food on the line at closing then. The kitchen strictly needed a few extra portions, easy to write off as normal waste, easy for Dale's inventory sheets to absorb without raising a flag. It wasn't a system. It was just one tired man making a quiet decision to give another tired woman a little more room to survive in, without either of them ever discussing it directly. It worked for almost 5 months. Then corporate sent down a new directive. Branch 52's food cost percentage had been drifting upward for 2 financial quarters running, and headquarters, looking at spreadsheets, not people, flagged it as shrinkage requiring investigation. Dale, under pressure from a regional call he hadn't asked for and didn't fully understand the cause of, called a staff meeting that Friday morning to announce new high-definition cameras going up in the kitchen and storage areas within the week. Anyone caught taking food without paying, he said, voice severe, gets terminated. No warnings, no exceptions. Reggie sat near the back of that meeting with his stomach in a knot he recognized immediately. He understood, with a clarity that made him feel slightly sick, that the extra portions he'd been quietly leaving behind for 5 months were very likely the exact pattern that had triggered corporate's attention in the first place. He hadn't meant to expose her. He'd meant to help. He had done both at once, and there was no way to undo either. He didn't tell Imani what he suspected. He told himself there was still time to think of something. There wasn't, not really, but it felt better to believe it for a few more days than to sit with the alternative. That night, Caleb followed the back exit ritual one more time, except this time, instead of waiting near the dumpster, he made a different decision. He sat in his car across the street and watched Imani board the 11:52 bus, a grocery bag in her hand, and instead of simply observing, he followed at a careful distance, telling himself it was reckless, and doing it anyway. The bus wound through downtown Memphis and into neighborhoods that grew progressively rougher, streetlights sparser, boarded storefronts replacing the trendier blocks closer to the diner. 40 minutes later, it stopped in front of a worn apartment complex. Imani climbed the exterior stairs to the 3rd floor and stopped outside apartment 3C. Before she could get her keys out, the door flew open. A boy of about 8 and a girl around 6 threw their arms around her waist, nearly knocking her backward, their voices bright and overlapping. Imani, did you bring food? We're so hungry. Mrs. Lynn only had crackers today. Caleb watched, from half a block away, as the exhausted, guarded woman from the diner floor disappeared entirely, replaced by someone warm and present. She laughed, really laughed, and herded the kids back inside. Through the half-open door he caught a glimpse of bare walls, a sagging couch, a card table with mismatched chairs. She unpacked the grocery bag and divided the food evenly between the 2 children. She kept nothing for herself. Caleb sat with his hands on the steering wheel for a long time after the door closed. Everything suddenly made a kind of sense that hurt to hold. He did not call his father that night. He told himself he needed more time to understand the full picture before he said anything to anyone. He did not yet know that Reggie's quiet arithmetic had already set something in motion that neither of them could stop. I want to step briefly outside the main events here, because there's a piece of this Caleb didn't witness directly, and it matters. Imani had called the company's employee assistance line twice in the past 6 months, each time during a break she wasn't supposed to take, hiding in the restroom so no one would hear the conversation. Both times, the answer had been some version of the same thing. Her income, on paper, technically, disqualified her from hardship support while remaining nowhere near enough to actually cover rent, utilities, and food for 3 people in the same month. The Urban Institute has a name for the gap she kept falling into. Researchers call it a benefit cliff, the point at which a modest increase in reported income causes someone to lose assistance worth far more than the increase itself, leaving them measurably worse off for having worked harder. Imani didn't know the term. She just knew that asking for help twice had gotten her nothing but a polite voice telling her she made too much to qualify and not enough to live. She had stopped calling after the second time. She had started, instead, doing the only math that had ever actually worked: leftover food divided between 2 children every night the kitchen had any to spare. The emergency meeting happened on a Friday morning before the lunch shift, unusual enough that everyone filed into the break room with the particular anxious energy of people who sense something has already gone wrong before anyone explains what. Dale stood at the front, his laptop open. "I'm going to show you something," he said, "and I want to be clear, this isn't personal. This is policy." He turned the screen toward the room. Old security footage, timestamped 6 days earlier, the system's final recording, before the new cameras went in. It showed Imani in the storage room, packing food into a grocery bag. The room went silent. Imani sat rigid, color draining from her face. "This is theft," Dale continued. "Clear and documented. Corporates treating this as a terminable offense, effective today." "Those are leftovers," Imani said, her voice trembling but holding. "Food that was going in the trash. Company property is company property until it's actually in the dumpster," Dale said. He didn't sound triumphant about it. He sounded, if anything, like a man repeating something he'd been told to say and didn't entirely believe. Imani stood. "I have 2 siblings. They're 8 and 6. Our parents died in a car accident 3 years ago. I'm all they have. I work 50 hours a week here and still can't afford enough food after rent and bills. I'm not sorry for feeding my family." The room stayed dead silent. Brianna Cole, sitting near the front, glanced sideways at the server next to her, with an expression that had nothing kind in it. Reggie sat with his hands flat on his knees, staring at the table, the particular stillness of a man understanding, in real time, that his 5 months of quiet generosity had become the exact thread that unraveled everything. He opened his mouth once. Nothing came out. He told himself later that he simply didn't know what to say that would have changed anything. He wasn't sure that was true. "You're suspended pending corporate review," Dale said, his voice softer. Now but no less final. Caleb stood up. He had not planned to do this dramatically. In fact, for the past 9 days, since the night he'd followed Imani home, he had been quietly compiling something else entirely, pulling turnover data from Branch 52's personnel records using credentials nobody had thought to restrict from a new hire who happened to also be the owner's son, cross-referencing it against the date the staff meal program ended, building, page by page, a report he hadn't planned to present this particular morning, but had, as it turned out, already finished the night before. He set a folder on the table, the same folder, he realized distantly, that his father had once handed him. "Before anyone goes further," Caleb said, "there's something you all need to see first." Dale frowned. "This doesn't concern you." "My name isn't Caleb Cole," he said. "It's Caleb Whitman. Marcus Whitman is my father. I've been undercover here for 3 weeks." He opened the folder and turned it so the room could see the printed pages. "And I already know why this happened. It's not in the footage. It's in the numbers." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The room was already listening. Branch 52's turnover rate is the highest in the company. It started climbing almost exactly 6 months ago, the same month corporate ended the staff meal program to save roughly $200,000 a year. Company-wide food cost variance at this location started drifting the same month. He looked at Imani, then back at the room. "I'm not saying that to excuse anything. I'm saying it because this was never just about one person's choices. It's about what happens when a company removes something people were quietly depending on and never checks what breaks afterward. Dale's jaw tightened. Corporate sets that policy. I just enforce it. I know, Caleb said. That's exactly the problem I'm going to take to corporate myself. He took out his phone. He didn't call the executive boardroom. He called his father's cell directly, the private line, and asked him to come to the diner in person rather than take this over speaker in front of a room full of people who'd already been through enough that morning. Marcus Whitman arrived 90 minutes later, alone, no entourage, dressed the way he dressed when he wanted to look like he hadn't dressed for anything. In particular, Caleb met him in the small office, away from the staff, and laid the folder on the desk between them without preamble. You want to know what I found in 30 days? Caleb said. I found a woman, working 50 hours a week, who still can't feed her family because we cut a program to save money we've since spent twice over hiring and training her replacements. I found a manager enforcing a policy he didn't write and doesn't fully believe in. And I found a coworker who's been quietly covering for her for months because the system gave him no better option than doing it himself. Marcus sat down slowly. He didn't interrupt. Here's the only question I actually want you to answer, Caleb said. Not whether the policy made sense on a spreadsheet 6 months ago. Just this. If you'd known, back then, exactly whose face this decision would end up landing on, would you have signed off on it the same way? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the folder, not at his son. No, he said finally. I wouldn't have. It wasn't an apology exactly. It was closer to the first honest thing he'd said about the decision since he'd made it. Then that's the only thing that actually matters right now, Caleb said. Not whether you were wrong 6 months ago. Whether you're willing to be right today. Marcus looked up. What do you want me to do? Don't fire her. Don't suspend her. And don't make this disappear quietly. Either, because if we do, it happens again somewhere else next quarter, too. Someone else's kid sister. Caleb slid the folder closer. Give me 4 weeks. Real budget, real metrics, a program the board actually has to vote on, not a favor you do quietly to make today go away. Marcus studied his son for a moment, with an expression that held more complicated things in it than Caleb could fully read, something that looked, underneath the fatigue, almost like relief. For weeks, he said. Make it convincing. I won't protect you in that room. Just because you're my son. I don't want you to. Imani was not fired. She was not suspended. Within the week, at Caleb's recommendation and after a conversation with Imani herself about what she actually wanted, she was offered a transfer to the company's headquarters in an entry-level employee relations role, not as charity, but because 2 years of holding a struggling branch together while raising 2 children alone had given her exactly the kind of practical understanding of worker hardship that no business degree could teach. You'd be doing real work, Caleb told her, reviewing hardship applications, designing the actual process instead of just falling through the cracks of the old one. She was quiet for a long moment before answering. Why are you doing all this? Really? Because I spent my whole life thinking this business was numbers on a spreadsheet, Caleb said. Revenue, cost, margin. I never once thought about who absorbs the difference when the numbers don't balance. I watched you eat alone in the dark, and I finally understood what that actually cost someone. Reggie did not face disciplinary action, though Dale spoke with him plainly about the pattern that had, in its way, both protected and exposed Imani at once. Reggie didn't try to defend it as a system. He just said quietly that he hadn't known what else to do, and that he wished, now, he'd simply told someone with the authority to actually fix it instead of trying to fix it himself, one extra portion at a time. Caleb spent the following 4 weeks building exactly what he'd promised. A company-wide employee hardship fund with clear, sustainable eligibility that didn't punish people for working hard enough to technically disqualify themselves, alongside a restored staff meal program budgeted against the documented cost of turnover rather than treated as a discretionary expense. He presented it to the full board, including the company's chief financial officer, who had built her entire reputation on resisting exactly this kind of proposal. She studied the turnover data for a long moment before speaking. The Training costs alone at Branch 52 exceeded the entire annual cost of reinstating the meal program for that single location, she said. That's not generosity. That's just arithmetic we'd been doing wrong. The board approved the program unanimously. 6 months later, Caleb visited Branch 52 without any disguise. Everyone knew who he was now, and they greeted him without the wariness he'd half expected. Reggie was training a new line cook, the same patient rhythm he'd always had, minus the quiet arithmetic he no longer needed to run alone. In the break room, employees lined up at a refurbished meal station, hot soup, sandwiches, fruit, nothing extravagant, just food available to anyone. Wearing a uniform, exactly the way it should have been the whole time. Still feels strange, Reggie admitted, grabbing a sandwich. Like somebody's going to tell us it was a mistake. It wasn't, Caleb said. It was overdue. At headquarters, Imani now led a small team reviewing hardship applications. From across the company's 180 locations, the benefit cliff that had once swallowed her own requests, now something she specifically screened every new policy against, by name, in every meeting. Her younger brother, she told Caleb once, had started telling people at school that his sister helped fix the place where she used to work. He didn't fully understand what that meant. He knew, somehow, that it mattered. Narrator reflection: the part of this story I keep returning to isn't Imani in the storage room. And it isn't the boardroom vote 6 months later. It's Reggie sitting at the back of that Friday morning meeting, watching the exact consequence of his own quiet kindness arrive in a form he never intended and couldn't take back. He didn't betray her. He tried to help her in the only way available. To a man, with no actual authority to fix the system that was failing her. And that attempt, kept secret because there was no safe way to make it visible, became the very thing that nearly destroyed her. The Urban Institute's research on benefit cliffs documents something that should unsettle anyone who believes hard work is reliably rewarded. There is a real, measurable point at which earning slightly more money makes a person's actual situation worse, because the assistance they lose is worth more than the income they gained. Imani called for help twice and was told, accurately and according to policy, that she didn't qualify. The policy wasn't lying. It was just measuring the wrong thing. I think about how often the people closest to a problem, Reggie leaving extra portions, Imani doing impossible math every night, Dale enforcing rules he didn't write, are operating with more honesty about what's actually happening than the spreadsheet sitting 2 floors above them in a headquarters that set the policy in the first place. The fix, when it finally came, didn't require anyone to be a hero. It just required someone with the authority to ask the one question nobody had asked 6 months earlier. Whose face is this decision going to land on? Have you ever quietly covered for someone, bent a rule, looked the other way, given a little more than you were supposed to, because the actual system gave you no better option? And did it ever cost more than you expected it to for either of you? Disclaimer: this story is a work of fiction created for reflective and entertainment purposes. The phenomenon of benefit cliffs, where modest income increases trigger the loss of assistance worth more than the income gained, is documented by the Urban Institute and reflects real structural challenges in how income-based assistance programs are designed. The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics maintains data on wage gaps and living costs across industries, including food service, available at BLS.gov. If you or someone you know is navigating the gap between qualifying income and a living wage, the Urban Institute's research at Urban.org provides accessible information on how these systems work and what policy reforms are being proposed.